Hello, very beautiful community. Here is the order of the day. Mr. Patrushev has issued a warning about Kaliningrad. That's got some people into alarmed conversation about the prospect of Russia challenging NATO in the Baltics. We'll read Mr. Patrushev's statement and then analyze this broader issue of the Russian threat to NATO in the Baltics by reading a very nice piece by Marek Kohv from the International Center for Defense and Security in Estonia, a think tank doing foreign policy and military stuff. And then we'll critically react to Marek Kohv's piece. But even before we get to Patrushev, let's say a couple of words about Trump, because Trump has reduced his ultimatum to Putin from 50 to 10 to 12 days. Also, the headlines read. Has that in fact happened? In a way, yes, and in a way, no. Because these remarks for Trump are just additions to an accumulated porridge of inconsistent things he said in public about Russia, about Putin, about Ukraine over many, many months. So to report this as Trump reducing the 50-day ultimatum to a 12-day ultimatum is a certain kind of journalistic malpractice. I know it's hard for individual journalists to react to post-truth politicians, and it's hard for journalistic institutions to do this, but it's time we got our act together and did this. It misrepresents Trump to say that what's happened is that he's reduced a 50-day ultimatum to a 10-day ultimatum. It misrepresents the fact that Trump is a post-truth politician and makes him out to be like a Mitt Romney or a Barack Obama. What Trump is saying has a quarter of the value the same statement made by a different type of politician would have. So you've got to report this as such. Trump has said 17 cacophonous things. He's added one more to the list. It's a misrepresentation of reality and a misrepresentation of the reality that your democracies are sliding toward post-truth populism. To report this as the President of the United States position has shifted from 50 to 12. The President of the United States position shifts because it is based on dispositional states more than it is based on structured advice and proper beliefs. Okay. Enough. Let's get on with Patrushev and NATO and the Russian threat in the Baltics. Any military attack, Patrushev says, on Kaliningrad region will be met with an immediate and crushing response using all available forces and means of Russia stipulated by the military doctrine and the foundations of the state policy in the field of nuclear deterrence. So he's now chief assistant to the president of Russia and president of the Maritime Collegium since his demotion a few months ago. This has generated talk about, oh my word, the Russians are going to invade the Baltics. Before we get to this conversation via Marek's piece, let's talk briefly about two things we can say without getting into the military details. The first is that it's reasonable to expect, whether this is an example of it or not, Russian propaganda to start elaborating this Baltic direction without that necessarily having any bearing on whether they're planning to do anything in practice, right? So it's entirely possible that they're going to dust off and elaborate this propaganda folder because they want to counter the Western narrative that they're stuck in Ukraine and can't propose anything new except advancing 2 inches more in Ukraine and then talking about catastrophic Ukrainian collapses that seem not to have come. The second bit of analysis we can do without focusing on the military stuff is to point out that the Baltic states and Finland need to make these analyses off their own bat. They shouldn't be prejudiced by things that the Ukrainian state says, because the Ukrainian state is at war and it's in its interest, or it thinks it's in its interest, to exaggerate the risk of Russia attacking various countries. Now, let's move toward Marek's piece. And before we get to it, let's point out that it's warmly endorsed by the beautiful Mark Galeotti. Mark says this is a breath of fresh air amid the alarmist Narva Next hype. Check out this piece by Marek Kohv. It breaks down all the many reasons why Russian little green men would not be repeating the Crimean scenario in Estonia. I am less confident than Mark about this, so let's read Marek's piece and see if we get reassured. We're going to skip through most of it, but we'll look at every key section. So the first section is Russia's strategic encirclement and attrition in Ukraine. Russia is stuck in Ukraine, and even if the war stopped, Russian troops would still be significantly stuck and placed in Ukraine, right? It would not immediately free up all Russian units. The underlinings are all mine, not Marek's. So we get a sense about this section, and we all understand what it means. Article 5 and immediate retaliation. Now, Marek points out that a UK-led NATO battle group stationed in Estonia includes personnel from France, with both UK and France being nuclear powers, and is integrated into the Estonian division. Marek says Russia cannot prevail against NATO in a conventional conflict due to Western technological superiority. That is all true. In the context of Ukraine, Russia's willingness to employ nuclear weapons has proven purely rhetorical. That's false. No, it hasn't. It has been rhetorical up until this point. Nuclear strike against Estonia would be even more complicated given the proximity to St. Petersburg, but that's plausible. A scenario in which Russia might test Article 5 through a limited attack on Estonian soil is improbable. Next section. A deeper dive into regional cooperation. Close defense cooperation with Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland ensures a swift and coordinated regional response. By the time Article 5 has been formally triggered, the aggressor would already be confronting the combined multinational armed forces, rapidly augmented over time by the military might of the entire alliance. Any direct military aggression in the Baltic region would be repelled by significantly stronger and more integrated forces. Next section, Estonian Defense Forces, state of play and preparedness, and just some positive explanation there about Estonia's investments and advances in defense capabilities. The next section is learning and adapting best tech and best practices. We're going to skip that one too. The next section is beyond weapons and borders. Let's read a few lines here. The Estonian Reserve Army model enables rapid mobilization of a large and motivated force, while its functionality and comprehensive defense capability are regularly tested with exercises. The EDF is in the process of establishing a military campus in Narva that will accommodate up to 1,000 personnel. A further contribution to the defense of the eastern frontier is the new operational center of the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, and this means that Estonia's eastern border is the exterior border of the entire EU effectively. Peace through strength. Conclusion. Let's read this in its entirety. As long as Russia remains engaged in an aggressive war against a European nation fueled by its imperial ambitions, Estonia has no ground to fear a direct military threat. Our security is multi-layered and resilient. Estonia's membership in the European Union and NATO provides both economic stability and military protection, comprehensive defense, ironclad relations with the allies, the preparedness will continue to underpin Estonia's security, sustain investment in defense, maintaining high-level training, incorporating lessons learned from Ukraine are all essential contributions to deterrence. Moreover, Estonia's immediate neighbors have all been pursuing similar strategies and currently rank among Europe's leaders in defense investments. Excellent summary of the piece above. While vigilance is always warranted, there is certainly no need for undue concern in Estonia. And let's end with a little bit of positive hot air. At the same time, our focus must remain on the paramount objective, the continued and unwavering support for Ukraine, which isn't quite there if we talk about the West. By assisting Ukraine in achieving victory, which is not what's happening, we ensure Russia's imperialistic ambitions receive a decisive blow. which is not what's happening, therefore reducing the threat to broader European security for many years to come. So, Russia's caught up in Ukraine. There is NATO in Article 5. There's regional defense coordination. There's Estonia's military that's well equipped and modernizing. There's intelligence and security work on a very high level. So quite a few safety nets of reassurance against the Russian threat. So surely the conclusion is warranted that Estonia has no grounds to fear a direct military threat from Russia. Well, I don't know about that. So let's talk. Do I think this conclusion follows from the piece? I mean, obviously, this is sort of condescending, but if somebody submitted this as an essay and I happen to be marking it, I'd say, obviously, well, I'm completely unqualified to mark it. And it seems to me it's a superb summary of Estonia's military state of affairs. But if I'm just asked to mark whether there is a connection between the military observations and the geopolitical claim at the end, I think that the connection is tendentious, but it's nowhere near as strong as the piece makes out. Why? Well, I think the piece would be very convincing if rational deliberation about military objectives were what Putin were engaged in. Then the piece would be persuasive. What Putin's actually engaged in is a thought about how do I destabilize Western capitals by challenging Article 5 at the lowest possible threshold. Whether it be in the Baltics, whether it be up north in Lapland, Anders Nielsen has made the case for Lapland being more plausible for the very reason that Marek points out here, namely that if Russia interfered in the Baltics, that'd straight away be implicated in conflict with many more countries than just one. So this simply does not take on properly the political challenge that Putin's aim is not any kind of military success in the Baltics or in Finland, whether it be the success of something more militarily full scale, or the success of some kind of hybrid intervention. Putin is just after a situation whereby enough people have the perception that Article 5 is being challenged, and enough people have the perception that the Western powers don't want to do anything about it. So Putin's question on my analysis would be, how can we do something in Finland or in the Baltics or anywhere that'll challenge Article 5 at the lowest possible threshold with the biggest room for us to de-escalate if we choose to? I don't think this piece takes on the challenge of that question sufficiently. This piece gives a military picture and is very reassuring at the level of a Kremlin that's out to achieve particular military objectives in the Baltics. But Putin might say, look, I don't know anything about military affairs. Why can't we lob a couple of rockets at that 1,000-troop British contingent in Estonia? Let's find this paragraph from Marek. Yeah, a UK-led NATO battle group stationed in Estonia includes personnel from France. Let's say there's a couple of hundred French folks there. Let's say there's 1,000 Brits there. Why can't we lob a couple of rockets at them? Well, Mr. Putin, we can't do that. And even if we did, they're not going to hit the target. Well, we don't need them to hit the target. We just need to be seen trying. No, Mr. Putin, we can't do that. Well, find something else for me to do. It's very dangerous when it comes to trying to predict Kremlin activity to assume that the sorts of political actions that for military reasons would be obstructed if a Western state tried to take them would be for military reasons obstructed if the Kremlin tried to take them. It might be that Putin just starts with politics. Okay, find me the least absurd and least catastrophic way of a low threshold challenge to Article 5. Figure out what it is and then do it. With the aim not of hitting any target, not of successfully infiltrating a part of a foreign territory with green men, but through somehow just generating an impression in Western centers of power and among Western populations that Article 5 seems to have been challenged and have done nothing about it. Ungovernability, dissolution of political fabric, dissolution of the fabric of Western alliances is Putin's aim. There's no military aim, except the military aim which is secondary to that political aspiration of destabilization of the West. Seems to be this piece reassures us in an overly rationalized world where what's being rationally deliberated are military objectives. In a world where there are political objectives that could conceivably be achieved without any military success, this piece becomes less persuasive. So I think that's where I land with this. Let's assume that every bit of military and intelligence summation here from Marek is world-class and impeccable. I'm sure it is. The strength of the conclusion simply doesn't follow. So my analysis remains that we are probably, if we're going to gamble here, we're going to skip a situation where the Russians challenge Article 5. But we're going to skip it because of various kinds of historical contingency. It remains true that in some ways, in respect of some tendencies, we are drifting toward that scenario. So the answer to whether the Russians are going to do anything is, I don't know. Back against the wall? Probably not. But this article is not content with a sort of a 30% risk. This article says the risk is much closer to zero than that. And the substance of the article is missing the reckoning with the political analysis I have just implied to make its conclusion adequately generated from the substance of the piece. Lots and lots of love. Talk soon.